Speaking for the trees, no matter where they're from. The podcast.
So I wanted to start off with from your interview with Kelly, one of the things that you said that really made me sit up straight at one point was that you said that you were talking about the overlap and the connection between the conservation movement and historically the eugenics movement. Mm-hmm. And you said that eugenics was conservation as applied to humans. Mm-hmm. And that I was just like, whoa, okay, mind blown. And part of this story was someone named Madison Grant. So I just wanted to throw those two things out there as kind of a starting point, if you think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, I mean, so that's something that coming from it from a perspective of conservation. So I didn't really know anything about eugenics up until a handful of years ago. It's not something that most of us are taught about. I think there's reasons for that, but so coming from it from the perspective of that, and then so essentially I got interested in eugenics after reading about how some of the players in the conservation movement also existed in the eugenics movement. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was interesting, that there was overlap. And at the time I thought, well, maybe a product of the times. And I had just no idea how deep that rabbit hole was going to go when I started this research. So I think, I've come to the conclusion now after diving into different writings and trying to understand the frame of mind that both of these movements came from, and specifically trying to understand where the eugenics movement came from in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's now clear to me that, like, if you actually look into the history of these topics, it's blatant. Like, I mean, I actually have some quotes. I can look through my notes and try to find some here but basically the players in the conservation movement were you can consistently find them across the board, conservation and eugenics. They were all the same people. It was an interlocking directorate of people in both of those movements. And they came right out and said this, that they were the same movement. Madison Grant is the one that I'm the most interested in studying, because he was essentially the one that, I wouldn't say that he invented scientific racism, but he did bring all of the pieces together and present it in a scientific way. But it's not just Madison Grant, it's across the board. There's so many different conservationists who were at the forefront of the eugenics movement, and how they actually came right out and said, that that's what they were doing, that they were applying their background in wildlife management and zoology, and applying it anthropologically, applying it to humans. I mean, like I said, I have a number of quotes. So it's not just me, making assumptions about that. It's they came right out and said it on numerous occasions. So I think they're the same. They have the same roots. They come from a lot of the same mentalities, the same kind of creed. Yeah, definitely. It's not just an overlap. They actually have the same root.
Right. Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, to take a critical look at conservationism as a movement, and to look at its history, and to look at some of the things that drive it, is not at all to say that that there are not places that need to be protected, and that there are not things that need to be saved, or anything like that. So that's not the point of this conversation, is not to say that it should just be a free for all where we cut down all the trees and mine all the mountains. That's not the point of this either. It's more to point out how the priorities of those, how the overlapping priorities of conservationism and eugenics has led to some ideas that are still with us that are actually not helpful for protecting and saving different natural places and natural processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many examples of that, right? I mean, we can take examples from history. We can take examples that are happening today. But even just looking at like Yosemite and what happened there, I frequently think about like what might have happened if the people who were involved in early conservation movements were not racist, were not white nationalists. How might things have been different? Would they have been able to have opened their minds to Indigenous stewardship that was happening?
Right.
And this pattern is still happening all over the world. We still have conservation refugees being currently, created all over the planet still, because of that superiority mindset. So yeah, definitely not to say that we don't. Of course, I'm a huge advocate for like protecting spaces and tending spaces, but I think that conservation, because of the fact that it's born of the same perspectives, the same flawed perspectives, we really need to have more conversations about how that has played out into the conservation movement, and where maybe we've made some wrong turns and we're continuing to repeat mistakes that we're part of the foundation of it. So definitely think that we need to be dissecting this movement more than we have been, and doing it unapologetically.
Right. And I expect this conversation to take us around to invasive plants in particular, but maybe you could walk us through some of the history. For example, the Boone and Crockett Club and Madison Grant and some of these people, and just show us the connections that existed then.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Speaking for the Trees, no matter where they're from, is also a blog at kollibri.substack.com. That's kollibri.substack.com. Paid subscribers get exclusive blog posts and early access to podcast episodes. Intro beats by Big Joe Drummer. This outro music by Codebox. Join us again for another episode of Speaking for the Trees, no matter where they're from, the podcast.